All right, get things rolling. So once again, good afternoon. We hope you're all having a great Thursday. Before I hand it over to our speakers, I'm going to cover just a couple housekeeping items. The first thing is the screen. Your screen is completely customizable. So you can make your panes bigger, smaller, you can move them around. So feel free to do so to your liking. Second, you will notice a chat box as well as a Q&A. Feel free to share any thoughts, anything that comes to mind, light bulb moments, anything like that throughout the presentation. We love to hear from you guys during it. As far as the Q&A goes, we are going to try and leave as much time as possible at the end for Q&A, but we also might be answering some questions during the presentation, so feel free to ask at any point. And then any questions we don't get to will be collected, and with the time we have left, we'll answer as many as possible. For those that we don't get to, we'll be sure to answer them via email and share those out. Lastly, you all will receive a email with a recording of the presentation as well as the deck, and then a couple other resources and materials to check out that we think you'll find interesting. So with that, Anne, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce each other.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Anne Maltese, and I'm the Director of People Insights here at Quantum Workplace. I'm joining you from the balmy Fort Collins, Colorado. I saw at least one of our attendees is also in my neighborhood, so welcome, everyone. I've been in the employee engagement space now for 15 years. So it's been really kind of a dynamic time the past couple of years especially, and I've spent 7 of those years at Quantum Workplace, and I'm happy to join you today. And I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Shane McFeely. So I'll turn it over to you, Shane.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shane. I'm an organizational psychologist. I'm the lead researcher at Quantum Workplace. So I get to study ways to make work more engaging, how to make teams more productive, and really just improve the employee experience overall. I'm coming from Omaha, Nebraska, and just thinking this morning about how dirty that groundhog did all of us earlier this month, kind of ordering more winter. There's a sheet of ice on my driveway that when walked on, it'll make a grown man kind of slip, do a weird dance like I'm a cartoon or something, and then just fall. It was really sad. So I'm anxiously awaiting spring and warmer weather.
Any chance there's a video of that lying around somewhere?
I hope not. I hope not.
I got a good visual.
My cameras around the house. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for those introductions. Today's presentation is really all about employee success and sharing some insights that can help organizations in what is an ever-changing business landscape. So in today's presentation, we're going to cover what employee success is and how we define it. And then we're also going to jump into and dive into 6 trends, 6 of the biggest trends and critical issues that have come out of our 2022 Best Places to Work data. We'll share kind of what's been happening over time, and then maybe a little bit of what to expect in the coming year. So, and then with any time left over, we will jump into a Q&A and answer any questions that you guys have. So, Anne, I am going to hand it over to you to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Molly. So Quantum Workplace has been in the talent space for 20 years, and we help organizations create and maintain a culture of employee success. But what do we mean by that? What is employee success? So we see organizations that really do this well be intentional in 3 different areas. So the first being experience. And this is more than just employee listening or even just employee engagement. It's really being intentional about listening, understanding, validating, and improving what matters most in your employees' experience. It also entails impact. Think performance. This is really your employees and your teams being high performing, having clear goals that connect to your organization's business success and really are helping contribute to that. And then finally, magnetism, that you have a culture that not only attracts employees, but it also retains them. And so all three of these things individually are really important, but really the magic happens when they all work together. So we wanted to set the stage here because as you hear Shane and I talk today, you're going to hear us probably use words like magnetism or impact or experience. And we really want you to be thinking about how these all interact together to really create a culture of employee success. So to get us started, to get us interacting a little bit, we've got a poll for you. So I'm going to advance it. Molly, can you kind of would you be able to help our audience today kind of know how to interact with the poll?
Absolutely. So that poll should have popped up right where those slides are. So go ahead. Question is, which area of employee success are you most focused on in 2023? Go ahead and choose the option that's best for you. We'll give it a little bit of time for answers to come in, and then we can take a look at some results. Awesome. Yep, here we go. Starting to trickle in.
It's always fascinating for us to learn what's all top of mind for you. We did not offer it in all of the above.
We did not know, although should be. Okay, give it one more minute, a couple more seconds maybe. Okay. Let's advance it, see what everyone said.
Ooh, pretty split. A little bit around that, a little bit more of a lead with the magnetic culture, but really representation in all three. It would have been interesting had we had that option for all of the above. Maybe in the chat you can tell us if that's the case for your organization, but this is really fascinating.
Awesome. Okay. We'll keep on moving. So we've laid a little bit of groundwork as far as what our definition of employee success is. We've heard from the audience on where you might be focusing on in 2023. Shane, I'm going to toss this back to you. And if you could share a little bit more about the report, where the research came from, excuse me, and why these 6 trends should be top of mind in our current business landscape.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so today is our launch party, I would say. Our launch party has more graphs and charts than it has confetti and drinks, but still a launch party nonetheless. But really what we're excited about is kind of this trends report that we've put together at the end of last year and this year, really trying to identify, what are those trends in employee engagement? What are those trends in employee success? And really a lot of this stems from what we're seeing from our research. And so when we talk about our research, and this trends report is kind of jam-packed full of research in here. So I would highly recommend you take a look. And we really just kind of today try to cherry pick the things that we thought were some of the best things to kind of elevate for this group. But this data comes from our massive database from the Best Places to Work contest. So each year we listen to we have about 750,000 completed responses to our Best Places to Work survey. And from that, we're able to have kind of a unique vantage point where we're able to look at a massive scale across lots of different industries, lots of different working situations, kind of what is going on in the workplace, what's happening with the labor market. The other thing that we have is also our customers. So we have a whole team at Quantum Workplace who are many teams, in fact, who are on a daily basis talking with our points of contact, talking with our customers, seeing what those challenges that they have what are some of the things that are going well for them, and kind of what are they predicting might happen in the upcoming year. So when we thought about kind of what are those 6 biggest trends, that's kind of where those came from. A little bit of research, a little bit of customer input as well, and really just excited for this report to be out in the public and for you all to look through it.
I love that launch party. Okay, so now I say let's get into those 6 trends. Let's jump right in. So the first one we are going to talk about is bridging the gap between leaders and employees. And I think this is important because right now, right now, even though trust does play a key role in driving business and employee success, there is quite a large gap. And so it's something that needs to be talked about. So Anne, the question I have for you is, what's behind this trust gap, and how can people leaders work to rebuild their trust in their organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Molly. I'm actually going to show some data. And before I get to the heart of your question around what's behind kind of the lack of trust, I want to call our attention to 2020 on this graph, because I'm not going to make us all relive 2020. I know that wasn't necessarily the best year for anyone, but something important happened in this year, in that employee engagement actually spiked after the pandemic began. And that surprises a lot of people. But as we really dove into that research, one of the things that caused employee engagement to spike is increased trust in leadership. And then when we dig even further into those insights, what we were seeing in survey comments, what we were hearing from our customers, is that we were putting our employees first. We were putting their health and well-being first. A lot of employees were working from home. We had to communicate differently. We were trying to communicate maybe more frequently. We were being more transparent, more authentic with what was going on. It was also a time when diversity, equity, inclusion had to become a priority in more organizations. All of those things really allowed that trust to be strengthened among employees and managers especially. So I call that out because it is possible for us to have that alignment in trust. But going back to your question, Molly, kind of what's happened since then? Well, we've kind of moved out of the pandemic a little bit, or we've kind of gotten used to this. I know it's really cliche, but this new normal, so to speak. But we also have things like stats on productivity and how that is measured kind of decreasing. And if I know anything about a CEO, I know that that's something that they pay attention to, and it causes concern when in the press we see measures of productivity dropping. We've also had some terminology come into the workplace like quiet quitting or quiet hiring, or all of the various behaviors that someone can do that is quiet. And these really aren't new topics. You know, some of those are discretionary effort. They're not necessarily new things that are taking place in the workplace, but they are new labels. And I would actually say that the labels are breeding a little bit of distrust. They cause a little bit of animosity when they're discussed. And so I think that that's at play as well. And that's causing some of the trust to erode between these different populations. And finally, we're kind of living in a period, unfortunately, where there's a lot of divisiveness, whether it's politics, policies, core beliefs. Kind of feels like we have to take sides, and that there isn't that kind of area in the middle where we can agree. And so in workplaces right now, I think that it's so important to realize that what employees want and what leaders want really aren't opposite sides of the spectrum. Employees want to feel valued. They want to be trusted to do good work. They want to be in an environment that supports them doing good work. And leaders want the business to be successful. And those things aren't at odds with one another, but sometimes I think we talk about them in a way that makes them seem like they are. And so I think when we think about rebuilding trust, what do we do about this? It's really focusing on that intersection. What leaders want and what employees want aren't opposite things, but how do we create an environment where our employees feel valued, they feel like they can be successful, and in turn, our business can be stronger and successful. And so I think that's a little bit of what's happening and a little bit about what we can do about it. But I would say very tactically, maybe before closing this out, it's really about listening. It's about having empathy. It's about really taking action. And I might be giving advice to us as a society as well, not just in the workplace, but it's especially important in the workplace. You know, the title of this webinar being about a dynamic business landscape, this is so critical, and this trust piece is going to really infuse a lot of the other points that we talk about today as well.
There we go. Yeah, that's great. And, you know, with all of that information you shared, I'm curious if you think that we should always expect a gap that we're seeing right now. Is that something that, you know, with, you know, the action that some people can take, what leaders can take, something that can be kind of eventually,
Yeah.
you know,
No, I think going back to 2020, that proved to us that this isn't always a lasting trend. And what we were doing in 2020 may not be sustainable in the workplace today, all of those things. They might have been very specific to that time period, but I think we need to challenge ourselves to think about what was working then that can continue to live on. So no, to that point, I think 2020 kind of gave us the data to prove we can be more aligned. And as we think about what has happened since then, kind of really learn some lessons from that time period.
Awesome. Okay, we will move into trend number 2. So next one we're going to talk about is investing in employee engagement. So with the economic uncertainty that organizations and just people in general are facing and dealing with in 2023, organizations are having to really consider and look deep into what they're investing in, and where they're spending their money. So Shane, I'm going to toss this one to you. Can you talk to us a little bit about why organizations should not cut back and why they should still be focusing on making investments in employee engagement, even during this challenging economy?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think first starting with our definition of employee engagement. So we define employee engagement as the strength of the mental and emotional connection that your employees have with your work. And then thinking back to your question a little bit, Molly, because I think you're right that we've been having this kind of impending recession for more than a year now. I like to call it the pre-session. But we've really been expecting this, and I think all leaders are trying to figure out what's going on. What, you know, is this going to be a hard landing, soft landing, no landing? What's happening with my supply of really good talent? Some of those kind of things. And I think, as Anne kind of alluded to earlier, you know, I think leaders are understandably nervous about productivity. They're a little bit nervous about maybe the business outlook for 2023. But I think the best argument that you could, so one of the best arguments that you can make towards a leader about employee engagement isn't really about, you know, we want employee engagement so that, you know, we're making employees happy, or that we're really trying to give them everything they would need. Instead, what I would try to make the argument towards is that we need employee engagement for productivity, for impact. And so one of the things that we know from the research is that employee engagement, just when we look at recessions and what happens to employee engagement during recessions, we know that employee engagement dips a little bit, you know, when folks are kind of nervous about their financial situation, nervous about their job security. There's always going to be kind of more out them than that distracts them from their mission. But when we think about, but the other big finding that comes out of at least the last 2 recessions is that the relationship between engagement and productivity actually gets stronger as we enter these kind of economic downturns. So, and if you think about what that means, if it kind of makes sense. So if you think about, those engaged employees, those are going to be the folks that say, they're going to be the ones that are looking for cost savings. They might be the ones trying to use discretionary effort to kind of get our goals done on time, or to really hit that last kind of 10% on their goals or their quotas. They might even be the ones who are thinking about ways to be more efficient and cost cut as well. So I think those organizations that are already focused on their culture or already focused on their employee experience, they're going to be the ones that are really going to survive the next recession, whenever that might happen, and there will be another one. And so if you think about, we recently did some research with Harvard Business Review Analytics Services and talked about, what do they believe about the impact of employee engagement? And the vast majority of them are saying that engaged employees perform better. I think leaders kind of generally grasp that concept that, if you have happy employees, they're going to be working harder, and we're going to have happier customers as well. But when we look and turn to what's actually happened, we see that only 56 say that they have achieved a positive ROI from their engagement efforts, and 62% that say that they've had those kind of positive results kind of more generically. So I think the gap that we're seeing there for those organizations who aren't really kind of seeing that ROI is really, turning this employee engagement into an HR thing or into a survey thing, instead of this being an active listening exercise and kind of a taking action exercise. It becomes more of a continuous survey and, let's see what happens on the next survey, instead of making kind of that continual effort and making sure that employee conditions are better, folks have what they need to really be successful in their job. And I think that this really feeds into kind of the next trend that we'll be talking about here. Spoiler alert, will really be about, employee impact, employee performance, kind of really talking about the outcome of that employee engagement. So, I think, for those leaders who might be still skeptical of, gosh, I really need to cut costs, or I'm worried about the business. It's not that we just want our employees to be happy and everybody to feel good. This is really so that employees are performing at their highest and getting the materials and equipment that they need so that they're able to be successful.
Yeah. I can't agree with that more, although, maybe that's not surprising, but I think another point that's so important is really thinking about all of the insight and the intelligence you get from listening to employees and therefore being able to take action. Sometimes what we hear from our customers is a little bit of caution in surveying in what might feel like a turbulent time. And like, we're a little bit afraid of the feedback. I would argue that is the most important time to listen to your employees, because it's not about the scores, it's about the insight and the intelligence that gives you the ability to take effective action. So just had to add that point on, because I think it's so important and something that we certainly coach our customers to.
Yeah, that's great. One thing that, I think we always say is it's not just ping pong tables and pizza parties.
Yes.
Actually listening. And so, making that investment and making it a priority is huge. And employees feel that too. So, I personally, I feel that here at Quantum, because it's such a priority to truly listen and make changes or take action based on what you're hearing. So thank you both for that. We're gonna keep on moving into the third trend. So Shane and Ann kind of teased this, talking about inspiring employee impact, focusing on productivity, and making sure that you're focusing on the right things when it comes to productivity. So Ann, this one's for you. What advice would you give to a leader worried about productivity? And how do you inspire employees to do their best work?
Yeah. I think it's important to empathize with leaders. And I know a lot of people are sick of this word, but I think it's important to understand we are in this period of uncertainty, or we've been in this period of uncertainty. And I think that is important to remember, because uncertainty creates anxiety. And as humans, when we are feeling anxious, we have a human tendency to want to control things. And so specifically around this topic, what that can translate into is maybe a little micromanagement of productivity or performance, or it can translate into trying to measure things that aren't actual measures of productivity or performance. So think things like mouse movements on a computer, or looking to see when people are online or not. We're kind of looking for cues to know, are our people being productive? Are our people being high performers? And those maybe aren't the right places to look. So my advice would be, even though we can understand that human tendency, it's not to fall into that trap, because that is going to do far more harm than good inside of your workplace and your workplace culture. But of course, productivity matters. We understand that, and we are huge advocates of that as well. So I would say my second piece of advice, and getting to the second question around how you inspire people, is to really have a approach to performance management that can inspire and that can be engaging. Usually when I say that, people are questioning whether I'm describing some mythical unicorn that doesn't exist. Can performance management actually be engaging? We did some research there, and what we're looking at are the elements of performance management that actually have the strongest impact on employee engagement. So this was really exciting research for us, because it really confirmed if an employee feels like they'll be recognized, if they contribute to our success, they will be more engaged. If employees feel like their performance is evaluated fairly, they will be more engaged. And so when we really look at this list of top 5 drivers of engagement when it relates to performance, I would argue the top 3 especially, but really all 5 are about being invested in, or about being kind of appreciated and recognized and things of that nature. So as you're thinking about what can we be doing to make sure that we are inspiring our employees, I would use this as a checklist with your performance management approach to say, if it does not feel like we are fair, hint, hint, that annual review probably does not feel fair, then we've got to think about something else. That annual review does not set our managers up to be coaches. That's not frequent enough touch points to really have visibility into our employees' work and to be able to provide that coaching. So again, using this as a checklist, but even more tactically, some of our other research in this area shows that it's so important to involve your employees in goal setting. It gives them that feeling of ownership. It allows them to feel like it's actually their goal that they're contributing to, and that can help with the fairness piece as well, instead of goals happening to them. So thinking about making sure employees have goals, making sure they feel like they have ownership and they're involved in that goal setting conversation. But another really interesting insight from that research is that employees want frequent one-on-ones. In fact, the majority prefer weekly one-on-ones, and that is associated with stronger engagement. So not only is it a preference, but it's actually effective. So one of the things that we hear about sometimes when organizations are considering changing their approach to performance management is, isn't that a lot more time? If we're asking our managers to have weekly conversations, isn't that more time than the annual review? I would say that if it is, it's time worth spent, because it is actually driving performance, it's driving engagement, it's actually something that's preferred inside of your organization. So a few things to consider there.
And I think there's a question in chat that really hits at this trend 2 and trend 3, kind of hits on both of them, which is, how can I convince my leaders that investing in employee engagement is a smart investment now? What numbers can I show them that they can see their anticipated return? And one of the things that I think about when I'm thinking about what numbers, I don't think that there's ever going to be a, here's your ROI, because I think it's going to be different for every organization. What someone in accounting is in an accounting firm is going to be completely different than, someone who is in healthcare. So being able to show them that data, but I also think it's tough to even put a number on, because I think if it somewhat depends on what you think of not only engagement, but also the negative costs of disengagement. You know, if you have a negative, or if you have a someone who's disengaged and they're the lead engineer at SpaceX, you know, the ROI of that could really literally blow up the rocket ship, you know, if we're talking there. So some of those I think are really difficult. But I think also if you look at, let's say in a hospital system, what that does for patient satisfaction, how do engaged employees, how do they have fewer maybe medication errors or some of those kinds of things. It's tough to really put a dollar on those things, but I think for each organization, those HR leaders should really start to think about dollarizing some of this and think about that ROI if they're really getting pushed about that investment. But I'd say it's even difficult to even put dollar signs behind the negative costs associated with disengagement as well.
I think it goes back to what Molly mentioned earlier too, from her own experience. It's making sure people really understand what we mean by employee engagement, or even that more broad concept of employee success. Like, we're not talking ping pong tables. We're not talking about fancy decorations in the office that maybe some of your employees aren't even going to these days. It really is about making sure we have the things we need to be successful, so that way we can help the business be successful. And so I think it's important for us to use the right language when talking to leaders, especially to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. We don't want employee engagement to be something like quiet quitting, where no one quite knows what we're talking about, and it just kind of makes everyone bristle a little bit and feel uncomfortable. So really making sure that we're talking about employee success, business success, and kind of those three factors that we talked about earlier when it comes to investments and intentionality and employee success.
Yeah, the things that are going to really make a difference in a workplace.
Absolutely.
We had another question come in during that I think is still relevant for the last couple trends. So is there a difference in how office or administrative staff feel rather than the line level? Either one of you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we look at some of our research, there's certainly can be a gap based on your position level, you know, and some of that has to do with whether or not you're a manager and what your tasks are. But I'd like to believe that within any role, there's that capability of engagement. So maybe that the range of that engagement is a little bit different, but I think that there are ways to make any role within the organization show how show how each role contributes to that overall broader mission, and kind of make that connection from what every single person does at the organization and how that contributes to organizational success. So there may be gaps there, but I don't want us to use that gap to kind of explain away why someone may or may not be engaged.
Yeah, love that. And actually a great teaser, a great lead into the next couple of trends. So as we keep on moving, so we've talked about engagement and experience. We've talked about impact and performance. But I think there's a third even more important piece, or maybe just as equally important piece, that is building a magnetic culture. So this might be something that, you know, has been a little bit difficult maybe in the past couple of years with all of those changes for workplaces to kind of wrap their arms around. So Shane, this one's for you. How do organizations get started with being intentional about building their thriving culture, and a culture that translates to to remote, hybrid, and workplace environments?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think when we talk about organizational culture, we define it as how work gets done. This is really about, you know, how leaders are communicating to employees, how then employees are then communicating back with leaders, what we value, what we reward, and what gets recognized in the organization. How do we manage and measure performance? How do we treat one another at work? All of those kinds of things. And so when we think about organizational culture, we sometimes think about the physical workspace, or we might think of, some onboarding kind of experience that you go through, or the all hands, everybody together at, in-person company retreat. And all those things are great and certainly probably contribute to organizational culture. But as we've been becoming increasingly remote, hybrid work, all of these different arrangements are happening. That's somewhat a difficult way to define culture. And if you kind of just leave it there, it makes it really difficult to reach those employees who might be working remotely or might be in a hybrid environment. And so we need to identify places kind of in everyday employee life where we can live out their organizational culture. So, how do we create a culture with hybrid or remote work arrangements? I think that was the original question. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that nobody's really just nailing this right now. Like, there's no GOAT when it comes to the remote and hybrid work management that's happening. I think that we're all still kind of learning this. If you think about pre-pandemic, remote work levels were at about 5%. Now we're at about 6 times that. So we haven't had to deal with this at scale like we have been seeing now, and we're starting to see a little bit of some returning back to where we were, but it's still high than what we've seen historically. So I think, first of all, everybody give each other grace that, we don't necessarily have this thing nailed. But I think if we start, if we really think about how to create that culture, it makes it difficult because we don't necessarily have that feedback loop built in where, leadership shares something, I can see it, I can feel those reactions, or I can see what happened or what questions employees have to that communication or change. But if we start to consider, the experience of organizational culture most strongly, based on some research that we did, we can start to build a culture that's more conducive to remote work. So first, I think the first thing you can do is get clear about what your organizational culture is. If you're not intentional about your organizational culture, one will form kind of without your guidance there, and it might not be the culture that we necessarily want to build. Second, leadership. From our research, leadership is paramount. I think based on our research, leaders are looked to as the place where organizational culture is shaped, where it's created, and where it gets lived out. And then finally, look at your policies and some of your management practices as well. Are they aligned with the culture that we're trying to create? Are you building a culture of innovation, but you still have ancient kind of technology? Are you building a culture of growth and development, but you're not giving employees any resources or time to build these skills? So culture isn't really about what you say. It's not really about the things that we're hanging on our wall or the physical environment. It's truly about what the employees experience and how you live out your culture on a day-to-day basis. And that will, really strengthen the organizational magnetism and be considered an employer of choice by building it kind of with more intention involved.
Yeah. I always think it's helpful to think about a remote employee that is joining a new organization. And especially if you are in a computer-based role, I picture quitting the old organization, closing that laptop, maybe shipping it back to corporate, and then you get that new laptop in the mail, you set it up in probably your very same office that you've always worked out of as a remote employee, thinking about how do you make that different for that remote employee? How do you really get them exposed to your culture even before day one? And make sure that each day after that, they feel like they're part of something new. And again, I don't mean to say that in a way that it's easy, but I think that that's where organizations really need to be thoughtful and intentional. And that's kind of a very specific example with remote, but with hybrid or workplace, how do we want our employees to experience culture every day? So that way they are operating in a way, going back to the definition that Shane shared around culture, that it really is how we operate. It's how we recognize one another. It's how we communicate. It's how we live out our mission. And we do need to be really intentional there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that culture and the decisions that are made around culture, leading into the next trend that organized into really can affect retention.
Absolutely.
And it can affect, how your current employees staying and how they feel about their workplace. So
Yeah.
I think we all know that the job market is still a little bit tight and a little bit tumultuous. Organizations are really wanting to keep their best talent, their best people, but employees know that they have options and there are, they can move or, they're not stuck like they might have been once before. So, Anne, we're going to move this along. And can you tell us about why employees are leaving and what are the building blocks to creating that magnetism that we keep talking about?
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about our research, and we have research in this area as well. So we studied why employees are leaving their current jobs, and you see the top 5 reasons here that we have collected. So first and foremost, lack of career growth, followed by lack of fair pay, not feeling recognized or appreciated, an undesirable work environment, and then poor relationship with my manager. And as we look at these, I would argue that they're all addressable. Some may be harder than others, but a lot of times this turnover can be prevented. And so I think it's really important in your own organization to make sure you have your same list. I would guess it may have commonalities with our research, but your reasons may be a little bit different. And so, first answering why people leave, this is our research. I think your homework, if you don't already have it answered, is what is it in your organization? The kind of going to the other piece, what are the building blocks of a magnetic culture? It's really having a culture of employee success, kind of what we've described before. But I think even more specifically, it is having an employee value proposition that is accurate and attractive. Both of those matter. You can't have one and not the other. Sometimes we see in our own customers' data, as we study the different surveys that they do, that maybe I accepted the job because I thought that the job was going to be really interesting. It's a really good use of my skill set. But then as we follow that employee and maybe do a survey 60 days in, we might learn, the job is not what was sold to me. It feels very different. I'm not actually showing up to work doing the job that I thought I was, or there's something about the experience that isn't what was advertised to me in the recruitment and the hiring process. And then if we continue to follow those employees, usually in the exit survey, it's no surprise to say, I'm leaving to go elsewhere to a job that I think is a better fit. So the accuracy of that EVP really matters, of that employee value proposition, but also making sure that we have something that's attractive these days. So it's not just pay and benefits and career development. Teeing Shane up for his next point, we'll learn too that flexibility is also part of that. But I think, again, another building block to that magnetic culture is making sure that we've got a listening strategy that's really informative enough for us to know, why do people join us? Why do people leave us? And what is everything about the truth in between? And again, the more as HR leaders or other types of practitioners, we can talk about survey data as insight and intelligence, the more we can be kind of heroes inside of our organization to help know how to navigate forward.
Yeah, I love that. And teed up the next one for Shane perfectly. As far as, flexibility. So I think flexibility is probably a tough topic, just because not every organization is the same. So not every organization can offer the same options, right? So I think that makes it a little bit interesting, but we have some really cool research from 2022 that I think can help leaders really define what flexibility is to them and then where to prioritize that. So Shane, for the last trend, closes out strong here. What types of flexibility are employees looking for, and how might organizations get creative with what they can offer?
Yeah. So I think flexibility, workplace flexibility, we're at kind of a major inflection point. It's a major change in the way that we work. More than ever, organizations are allowing more flexible options in the workplace. We see the kind of rise of remote and flexible work arrangements kind of in the pandemic. We see some experimentation with 4-day work weeks, and even you could point to the rise of gig work and independent contractors and micro businesses. A lot of those all signal that employees kind of want more flexibility and autonomy over their work. And so we recently conducted some research to figure out more about what do people mean when they're referring to workplace flexibility, as well as what is the impact of that flexibility on their productivity. So when we asked employees how they define workplace flexibility, very rarely did they discuss remote work or a 4-day work week or some kind of shift arrangement, but really they put flexibility in terms of kind of their life. So one of the things that kind of stood out to us in the comments was about adaptability. That is, being able to work in a manner that really fits your life situation. So when an employee has a sick kiddo and they need to go take them to the doctor, or life just kind of pops up at a moment's notice like it tends to do, you have the ability to attend to those situations and really take care of the things that matters most to you. So and how does the organization respond when you do that sort of thing? How do they support you when those kind of things? The second thing that they come up with is really around performance focus. That is, being trusted by leaders and their managers to get work done in a time and manner that really suits them best. And that kind of can lead into that third one, which is autonomy, being able to frame their work week kind of in a manner that they see fit. So being able to talk about work-life balance, and then finally taking some of the time to determine their location and some of that kind of stuff. It's interesting. We also asked about so I guess kind of overall, I guess what I take from this graph and this research is that flexibility is less so about kind of the where and the when, as we kind of tend to put those boxes around it, but it's really about trusting employees to know what is their work, that they know what their work is, how to get it done, and that they'll be successful managing both their work and life around that. And I saw a few questions about flexibility in inflexible environments, some of those kinds of things. So we also asked about different types of flexibility, especially like seemingly inflexible jobs or work situations. So I'm thinking about people who, for people who even go to the workplace each day, we found that 7 in 10 of those folks who show up to the office each day, they say that the nature of their job requires them to be physically in the office. So many workers, I think, intuitively understand that they need to be into the office, or maybe why their jobs can't be more flexible. I think what they're asking though for is more opportunities to sort of craft that and have a little bit of autonomy and trust that I'm doing what's best for not only my life but also the work that I'm trying to get accomplished. We also found that if employees have more autonomy in their shifts, or at least know their schedule ahead of time for those jobs that might be shift work or might be inflexible to remote work, that's kind of just that's kind of what they're looking for. So flexibility in those types of roles might be knowing your shift early. It might be being able to choose your scheduled shifts, or the ability to trade coworkers when they're able, and kind of being able to meet your needs and having a little bit more autonomy about it. So flexibility certainly doesn't look the same in every single job and every single industry. And I think that's up for leaders and managers to really be able to trust their employees first, and then work on the productivity and the work part second.
Yeah. I think my favorite thing about this research is just it proved in the year 2023, when we say flexible work, it doesn't necessarily mean remote work or hybrid work. And I think that is maybe what some people have top of mind when they hear flexibility. And again, when we think about organizational leaders, sometimes when we can bristle, if we can't offer that flexibility, you can still think about flexibility. You should still think about how that fits into your workplace without it being that. And it's also my favorite thing about our research. We love to hear from our customers to say, like, another good example is what do we really mean by career growth and development? We did research on that, and we know what employees are thinking when they think about career growth and development. So for our customers that might be joining us today, if ever you've got those types of topics, please let us know, because that is how we can incorporate that into our research.
Love that. Yeah, my favorite, what I get out of it, and my favorite piece is we're people first, then employees. Yeah. And so if that could be a focus, it kind of brings all of those different ways that you can provide flexibility into one. And I just think, having that mindset is huge for employees, and knowing that their leaders feel that way. So, okay. We've got one last slide for you, and then we're going to move into the Q&A with hopefully a couple minutes left. So some key takeaways from this presentation. So Ann and Shane, I'm going to hand this back to you guys too.
Yeah, sure. I could speak to these and then we can get into the Q&A, but I think it's important. It's always a good time to invest in employee success. So again, a lot of our points here today as to why that actually helps in a turbulent time versus not being a distraction. Take a holistic approach to employee experience and impact and magnetism. So going back to that definition of employee success. Listening, analyzing, and acting on what you learn. So a lot of organizations listen. A lot of organizations might also analyze, but we don't always act. So making sure that we've also got that third component to that. Everyone playing a role. I think this is so important. HR, I know we have a lot of you on the call today. You wear so many hats these days. And while this is an important part of your job, it's not only your job. How are we equipping our managers, our leaders, and all employees to play a role? Staying focused on what matters most. So not falling victim to maybe some of the new terminology that comes out that might not actually be research backed, or sometimes our human tendencies to want to measure productivity, maybe not quite so healthy ways. And then finally, reinforcing your commitment in the day-to-day. So going back to what culture is, it's really how we operate. Each and every day, our employees should be able to experience a culture of employee success.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you both, Ann and Shane. Thank you for sharing all of that wisdom, all of those insights today. We are very grateful for you to spend the time with us and share all of that out. We have just about 5 minutes left, so a couple minutes to get into Q&A, and we'll begin answering those questions that you all have. As a reminder, please continue to ask questions. If we don't get to all of them, we will follow up in an email along with the slides and along with the recording of this presentation. Also, I want to call out the related content panel on your screen really quickly. All of the information we covered today, plus a whole lot more of really great insights, is in this 2023 Trends Report, and it is linked in that related content. So feel free to download that. It will also be shared out via email post-webinar. So you can keep an eye out in your email for that as well. Okay, Q&A. Let's jump right in. Let's start with Shane. I'm going to start with you and toss this one your way. Where does performance management go wrong? Where do we go wrong with performance management?
Yeah, I think we alluded this a little bit, but I think focusing on the wrong metrics can sometimes be one of those ways. I think, Anne, you talked about the green light or the green active on status. When we were preparing for this interview, I just did a Google Trends for mouse jigglers to see when did it peak, and right about the time that the term productivity paranoia entered our zeitgeist is about the time when mouse jigglers started peaking as well. So to me, that tells me that we're really focused on the wrong metrics. We're not focused on strategic goals that are aligned at the organizational team and individual level. We're really focused on kind of what used to be maybe the butts in seats metrics that I like to say. And I think that, this kind of rise in remote work that I've said has really kind of blown a hole in some of those things. So, that one, I would say, really the way that it goes wrong is a focus on metrics and a focus on the wrong metrics instead of kind of genuine impact and growth.
Awesome. Thank you, Shane. Next question we have, and I'm going to toss it your way. How do you suggest a leader deals with a view that no matter how much we try to engage employees, we cannot break through their passivity and hesitancy towards to give much back?
That's tough, but I would say we do see organizations that have strong engagement. We know it's possible. It may not have happened in your organization yet, but I would be curious of whether there are teams in that organization that you speak of that maybe have stronger engagement, stronger performance, and we can learn from them. But I really feel like what comes to mind when I hear this question is, if we do what we've always done, we'll get what we've always got. And so I think it is important to challenge ourselves to do something a little different, to think about employee engagement maybe a little bit differently, to talk about what the best organizations or the most successful organizations do differently, because we know it's possible, even if that particular leader hasn't had experience with it before or hasn't seen it, or maybe if your organization is still trying to think about how to achieve that.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a tough one. Great job, Anne. Thank you for that. I think we've got time for maybe one more question here. Shane, I'm going to come back to you with this one. Speaking about employee listening, what trends are showing as the sweet spot for frequency of listening to employees?
Frequency, that one's an interesting one. I think about it not so much as like how often, but I think about listening post about in kind of those moments that matter most. So I think certainly, if you're measuring employee engagement, you want to do so on a broad scale. So you want to have a company-wide employee engagement at least annually, with follow-ups if you can, like a mid-year check-in. But I also think that that's also a long time to go without data. 6 months without data is tough. So I think the other parts that you need to listen to are other listening posts. So that might be focus groups. That might look like onboarding surveys. That might be even a candidate experience survey. What happens? Are the things that we're promising during recruitment, are we actually executing on those during onboarding? Some of those kinds of things. So I think it's not necessarily about the frequency, but making sure that you have a listening post kind of and kind of that data collection coming in on those parts that kind of are continuously, or those moments in an employee life cycle that are always important. So yeah, that's how it is.
Perfect. That was a good one to end on. Okay, we are right at time. So a couple questions that we didn't get to, we'll be sure to share those answers out again via email, but we really appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to join us. We hope you have a great rest of your Thursday, and be on the lookout for an email with this recording. So
Thanks,
thank
everyone.
You all.
Have a great Thursday. Stay warm.
Stay warm, everyone.